Yes, what you're sort of the measure for measure, step for step approach, that Iran does something and its partners do something. But my argument is the Iranians should be, what you described in the 2013 agreement, or it was earlier, I think that was 2010.
Yeah, my apologies, it was 2010, yes.
When the Turks and the Brazilians worked out an agreement, and then the U.S. caused it to not, them to back off. If the U.S. doesn't do that, even if it doesn't support it, if it just doesn't try and block it, then Iran will benefit. I think that's what the Iranians should look for, not so much reversal sanctions, which is going to be very difficult for reasons almost unrelated to Iran, but more just what's going to happen in terms of the international scene, in terms of Iran's integration into the wider economic community in Eurasia, in terms of reestablishing contacts with the Europeans and so on. I think that's really where they should focus on in practice, whatever they say in public.
All right, Mr. Porter, it's
Could I just add one point about this?
Go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to add, apropos of the question of the U.S. Treasury Department looking for ways to harass foreign business entities, banks and companies who would like to do business with Iran but are afraid to do so if they would be punished in some way by the U.S. Treasury Department. I think that is a problem. In fact, I'm quite sure that that is a problem that has not gone away under this agreement. At least that there's a serious threat here that even though the sanctions that we've been talking about, the oil and banking sanctions, which were unilaterally imposed by the United States, will be suspended under the agreement when the implementation begins. I think that the Iranians quite understandably and accurately are concerned that the Treasury Department could still intimidate banks and other companies, despite the fact that they would not be technically violating the sanctions laws as they stand, because they would simply be afraid. They would be uncertain of the future. And that's why this question of retaining the so-called architecture of sanctions in place for 10 years or even longer is still an issue that needs to be resolved. The Iranians very much want to avoid that architecture of sanctions remaining in place for a full 10 years.
Right, but Mr. Porter, my question is, should Iran think that it's sufficient for the U.S. to stop this bullying tactic on the international arena, yet maintain its level of sanctions? Because let's not forget, these are negotiations. Each side has to give a little to take a little.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the necessity not just to suspend these sanctions, but to remove them certainly as Iran carries out the terms of the agreement that they've pledged to carry out. This is what the Iranians very specifically have demanded. The United States, as of yesterday certainly, had not agreed to do it, and I'm reasonably sure that that is precisely the situation today. So that's what needs to be changed in order to have a final agreement.
Okay, Mr. Waits, how do you see Israel reacting to it? We've talked about how Israel has tried to use its influence in Congress among American political parties as well to sabotage this deal in the past. And we had Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu say that a deal must significantly curb Iran's nuclear capabilities. And at this point, at least, it doesn't seem like that's happening.
I mean, as sure you laid out, I think there are three possible reactions. One is what we've seen in the past. Some Israelis say this is, you gotta get a deal, this is the best possible solution. Others say no, the only solution is no, no Iranian nuclear program, and that's not gonna happen. So then they say, lay out different scenarios. There's a question. I'm not sure how much of what Netanyahu was saying was due to the upcoming elections. Now they're past, so maybe he needed to fortify his national credentials, and now the elections are over, he's not going to be so stringent, or maybe he's will want to reconcile with the Obama administration. And three, what might be most likely, rather than the first option divided and the second reversal, is third, that they're going to wait and see what comes in the detailed agreement. Because again, this is just a framework agreement.
All right, Mr. Porter, when the Israeli intelligence minister threatens Iran with a military attack, and this just happened earlier today, do you think Israel is just going to wait and see?
I don't take Israeli threats of attack against Iran seriously at all, and I can explain very precisely why I do not take them seriously. I've done a good deal of historical research on Israel's policy toward Iran, going all the way back to the Rabin government in 1992-93, and through the first Netanyahu administration government in 1996 through 99. And what I found was that Israel's policy of threatening Iran, which began during that period of the early to late 1990s, was never really serious. It was never intended to be carried out. It was all part of a bluff, and it was part of a maneuver to get the United States to do certain things or not do certain things. And it was a tool in domestic Israeli politics to justify certain policies. And so I think there's a long tradition in Israeli politics of posturing in ways that are not really serious about Iran, including threats of attack against military sites or nuclear sites in Iran. And I think that the world's news media has paid entirely too much attention to Bibi Netanyahu. I think that they should simply ignore him, frankly.
All right, but what about the influence that Israel and pro-Israeli lobbies have on U.S. lawmakers? Mr. Waits, I put this question to you. Let's not forget that infamous letter that was given to Iran by U.S. lawmakers, just saying that Obama has no authority to sign a deal with Iran.
Yes, and the Iranians appropriately threw this out as domestic American politics.
Agreed, but do you see them flexing more of their muscles and trying to sabotage this? Because we still have until June the 30th till a final agreement is written down and signed.
You know, it's divided. There are some members of Congress that will oppose any deal. There are others that are trying to help the Obama administration by playing carrots and sticks, or threatening the sticks, and so the Obama administration can offer carrots. And there are others in between, sort of waiting. It's a tough call. There are domestic incentives to try and block it, but do you want to go down in history as the person who sabotaged a potential nuclear deal with Iran? So people are going to react differently depending on the motives that drive them. I still think that there's enough people in Congress that will want to wait and see what's in the final detailed agreement before they would try and, for example, impose more sanctions or something like that. I still think that there's not strong enough support just to sanction based on this framework.
Well, Mr. Porter, I put the same question to you. Added to that, of course, let's not forget in 2016, you're going to have the presidential election there in the U.S. What would those candidates be talking about when it comes to Iran's potential nuclear deal with the P5+1?
Well, on the second, the second part of your question, that's entirely predictable on the Republican side, because every Republican candidate for president is going to be looking to getting financing from large-scale financiers who are supporting the Likud position on Iran, the Likud government position on Iran. So we know for sure that they are going to be taking the bellicose line on this issue. But to go back to the question of what to expect from the Congress, I agree it's a bit difficult to read the present situation in terms of whether there's a 2/3 majority to carry out what might be called the nuclear option on this issue, which of course is to actually pass legislation which even removes the national security waiver, which allows the president to actually cancel the sanctions under certain circumstances. And that, of course, is what this agreement totally depends on. It depends on the president using the national security waiver to continue to allow trade and economic relations with Iran to go forward despite the congressionally mandated sanctions. So as long as you don't have a 2/3 majority and the president can veto that legislation, we're okay. But I just don't know if we have an accurate count, a head count in the Senate and the House at this point on whether that's still a very serious threat.
All right, now, gentlemen, we're quickly running out of time. Very quickly, if you can, Mr. Waits, I'll give you 1 minute to answer this. As far as the regional implications of this, specifically with regards to when we saw that temporary joint plan of action being agreed upon in Geneva, Kerry went and spoke to the different Persian Gulf monarchies, trying to assure them of this deal. How do you see them reacting?
I think what we're seeing in Yemen is an indication of that they're still uncomfortable with what they perceive as the growth of Iranian regional influence. You know, I mean, the Saudis have said that they will pursue whatever nuclear program Iran pursues. So they're going to take a harder line. The others, I don't know. I mean, it depends a bit on how it evolves in the detailed agreement. Depends on how Iraq evolves. Certainly, those countries are probably divided. Some of them want to engage in trade and mutual benefit with Iran, whereas others are fearful, again, of Iran emerging as the dominant regional hegemon. So see a bit of, it's hard to say how it's going to roll out. It depends on several developments over the next few months.
Okay, Mr. Porter, how do you interpret it?
Well, certainly, obviously, the Saudis are totally opposed to this agreement. They would prefer to see no agreement like the Israelis. But again, I would suggest that it's extremely naive to take the Saudi threat to go nuclear as a result of this agreement at face value. I mean, it simply doesn't really make sense for the Saudis to go all the way over to having a nuclear weapons program simply because the two sides have reached an agreement that establishes very sharp limits on the Iranian program, as well as an unprecedented system of verification, an intrusive system of verification. It would be stupid, and I simply don't believe that the Saudis are serious about their intentions as they have declared them.
Okay, let's leave it there. Unfortunately, time's gotten the better of us. That was American historian and investigative journalist Gareth Porter, and also joining us is expert at Wikistrat, Richard Waits. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us in this edition of The Debate. For me and the entire team here in Tehran, it's goodbye.